Walk into any major city and you'll notice something strange. The McDonald's that's been on that corner for 20 years. Gone. The Wendy's that served your high school lunch. Shuttered. Fast food chains are closing stores at a rate we haven't seen in decades, and the reason isn't what anyone's talking about. Everyone's blaming delivery apps or minimum wage hikes. But dig into the actual numbers and something far more fundamental is breaking. The entire economic model that made fast food profitable for half a century just stopped working. And most chains realized it too late. Let's start with what actually changed. For 50 years, fast food operated on a simple formula. Find a busy intersection, build a box, hire cheap labor and wait for customers to show up. The math was bulletproof, real estate was affordable, labor was $4 an hour, and most importantly, people had no choice but to come to you. That last part, that's what died. The shift happened so gradually that franchisees didn't see it coming. First, smartphones meant people could check reviews before walking in. Then delivery apps meant they didn't need to walk in at all. Suddenly, that expensive corner location you paid premium rent for? Worthless. Your building became just a kitchen that nobody sees. But here's where it gets interesting. You'd think delivery would save these places. More orders, same kitchen, no additional real estate costs. Except the delivery apps take 30% of every sale. 30%? On an item that already operates on razor-thin margins. Do the math. A burger that costs $2 to make sells for $6 in-store. That's a $4 profit. Take away 30% for the app and you're down to $2.20. Factor in increased packaging costs and you're barely breaking even. Many franchisees are literally losing money on delivery orders. So chains tried raising prices, which worked for about 6 months until customers noticed they could get actual restaurant food for the same price. Why pay $15 for a fast food burger when a local spot charges $16 for something that doesn't taste like cardboard? This created a death spiral. Fewer in-store customers meant less revenue from the high-margin items like drinks and fries. More delivery orders meant higher costs and lower margins. And the whole time, rent kept climbing. Speaking of rent, let's talk about the real killer. Most fast food locations signed 20-year leases back when that corner spot was worth the premium. Those leases locked in annual rent increases, usually 3 to 5%, which seemed reasonable when sales were growing 6 to 8% yearly. But sales aren't growing anymore, they're shrinking. The average fast food location saw revenue drop by 12% between 2019 and 2023. Meanwhile, their rent increased by 18%. The math just doesn't work. Then labor costs exploded, not because of minimum wage laws, though that didn't help. The real issue is that nobody wants these jobs anymore. For decades, fast food relied on teenagers and young adults willing to work for minimum wage. But something shifted in the last 5 years. Gen Z simply won't take these positions. They'd rather work retail, do gig economy jobs, or piece together remote work. Anything but stand over a fryer for 8 hours. So chains are forced to pay $12, $15, even $18 an hour just to staff a shift. That's triple what they budgeted. You might think automation would save them. And some chains are trying. But here's the problem. Retrofitting a kitchen designed in 1985 for robotic equipment costs $500,000 per location. Most franchisees can't afford it. And even if they could, the technology isn't reliable enough yet. I watched a fully automated burger system jam 3 times in one lunch rush. The staff ended up cooking manually anyway, except now they also had to troubleshoot a $100,000 machine. The future isn't here yet, but the bills are, so chains are stuck. They can't raise prices without losing customers. They can't lower costs without sacrificing quality. They can't move locations because they're locked into leases. And they can't attract workers without paying wages that destroy their margins. The result? Mass closures. Burger King shut down 400 locations last year. Subway closed more than 7,000 stores since 2016. Even McDonald's, the most successful fast food chain in history, is pulling back. But there's one piece of this puzzle that nobody's connecting: the closures aren't random. They follow a very specific pattern, and understanding that pattern reveals what's really happening to the entire industry. The pattern is geographic and it's brutal. Fast food isn't dying everywhere. It's dying in specific places while thriving in others. And the divide tells you everything about where this industry is headed. Look at rural America first. Small towns are getting destroyed. When the local Wendy's closes, it's not just losing a restaurant. It's losing one of the few gathering spots left. But these closures make perfect sense economically. A location needs to serve around 800 customers daily to stay profitable. Most rural franchises are seeing half that. The population isn't there anymore. Young people left for cities decades ago, and the remaining residents are aging out of the fast food demographic. You can't run a business on 70-year-olds eating senior menu items twice a week. Suburbs tell a different story. Not all suburbs, though. The older inner-ring suburbs built in the 60s and 70s are bleeding locations. These areas have the worst of both worlds. High rent from being near cities, but declining populations as families move further out. The sweet spot now is outer suburbs built in the last 15 years. Places with young families, new construction, and actual population growth. That's where chains are doubling down. Cities are the most interesting. Fast food is essentially being zoned out of expensive urban cores. A Manhattan location pays $40,000 monthly in rent. It needs to generate $1.2 million annually just to break even. That's 4,000 customers every single day. Even the busiest McDonald's can't hit those numbers consistently anymore. So chains are retreating to secondary locations. Not prime real estate, but close enough to catch foot traffic without the insane rent. But here's what nobody saw coming: the death of the franchise model itself. For 50 years, franchising was the perfect business model. Corporate collected fees and royalties while franchisees took all the risk. Except franchisees are finally realizing they're getting a terrible deal. They're paying 6% of revenue to corporate while barely staying solvent. Many are walking away from their agreements entirely, willing to eat the penalties rather than keep hemorrhaging money. Corporate can sue, but you can't squeeze blood from a stone. This is creating a fascinating shift. Chains are being forced to buy back failing franchise locations and operate them directly, which they absolutely hate doing because it exposes them to all the risks they spent decades avoiding. Suddenly, corporate has to deal with local labor markets, real estate negotiations, and actual operations. And they're discovering what franchisees knew all along. The model is broken. Some chains won't survive this, the mid-tier brands especially. Quiznos basically collapsed. Sparrow is a ghost of its former self. Long John Silver's exists more as a memory than an actual business. These brands have no path forward because they're stuck in the middle. Too expensive to compete with McDonald's, not good enough to justify premium pricing. They're just slowly vanishing. The survivors will be the extremes, either ultra-cheap dollar menu-focused operations that compete purely on price, or premium fast casual brands that offer genuine quality. The middle is dead. You're either the cheapest option or you're actually good. Nothing between those poles makes sense anymore. What's replacing traditional fast food is genuinely interesting. Ghost kitchens are taking significant market share in cities. These are delivery-only operations running out of warehouse space, with no dining room, no parking lot, no real estate costs. They can undercut traditional locations by 30% while maintaining better margins. They're not restaurants in any traditional sense. They're food factories optimized for delivery apps. Meanwhile, convenience stores are moving into the space fast food is abandoning. Wawa and Sheetz aren't just gas stations anymore. They're legitimate food operations with better quality than most fast food chains and lower prices. They already have the real estate and foot traffic. Adding food service is almost pure profit for them. The fast food industry isn't ending. It's splintering into completely different business models that happen to serve similar food. 20 years from now, we'll look back at this era as the moment everything changed. When the corner burger joint stopped being the default option and became just one choice among many. The buildings will still be there, many of them anyway. but what happens inside them will be unrecognizable to anyone who grew up in the drive-through era. That world is already gone. We're just watching the last locations figure it out. The chains that survive will be the ones that accept this reality first. McDonald's is already pivoting, closing underperforming stores while investing heavily in the few locations that still work. They're not trying to save the old model. They're building whatever comes next. For everyone else, the question isn't whether to adapt. It's whether they can afford to wait long enough to figure out what adaptation even means. Most can't. The closures you're seeing now, this is just the beginning. We're maybe 20% through this transition. The next 5 years will be brutal. And here's the uncomfortable truth nobody wants to say out loud. Maybe that's okay. Maybe we don't need a fast food restaurant on every corner. Maybe the industry got too big, too fast, and what we're watching is just a correction back to sustainable levels. The golden age of fast food was an anomaly, not the default. We're not witnessing a collapse. We're watching an industry return to its natural size after decades of artificial inflation. Some towns will lose their last chain restaurant. Some franchisees will lose everything they invested. That's not a crisis. That's just math finally catching up.